Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright, I hope you're keeping safe and I hope you're keeping sane and I hope you're enjoying this beautiful weather we're having at the moment. And if you're in an area of the country or indeed of the world where you're not having beautiful weather at the moment, then my apologies, but I guess it sucks to be you. Coming from someone who lives in England, then I feel it only right that we celebrate this small part of summer, which will probably last about 3 days. Anyway, I want to talk today about rock bottom. It's a term that gets bandied around all over the place when it comes to talking about addiction and not just gambling addiction. In case you haven't come across this term before, put very, very simply, rock bottom is the lowest point that you can get to, both in terms of your emotions, your finances, your living situation, your employment and everything else. Every part, every facet of your life, it is the lowest of the low that you can reach in each of those areas of your life. For example, if we carry through the idea of gambling addiction to the nth degree, what can happen? Well, obviously you can end up losing all your money. You can end up borrowing loads of money and losing that as well and ending up in a significant amount of debt. Yes, that can lead to losing your home, having your car repossessed, all those sorts of things. That would be financial rock bottom. In terms of other elements of your life, of course, you could end up, losing your wife, your husband, your partner. You could lose associations with your friends. You could upset your friends. You could have members of your family who no longer want to associate with you. You could lose your job. Tons and tons of things that could all come together into one massive ball of shit, which would cause you to be at what we call or assume to be rock bottom. Now, often people seem to want to wait for a moment of rock bottom before they start their recovery in earnest. Now, I think a lot of this is probably down to the depiction of gambling and gambling recovery, in the media, in films and all the rest of it. There's something quite romantic, quite a almost cinematic notion of someone who has gone from a casual punt one day on the National, which has spiraled out of control. They've found themselves a gambling addict. They've sold everything. They've lost everything. They're at the lowest point of their life, and they managed to come back fighting and rebuild their lives into something spectacular. That is very, very cinematic. It's very Hollywood. As like I say, it's got a slightly romantic twinge about it. However, real life, as we know, is nothing like the movies and nothing like the depictions we see in the media and even here on YouTube, where things aren't always exactly what they seem to be. So this idea of reaching rock bottom before we recover, whilst kind of lovely sounding in principle, has several fundamental flaws, and that's what I sort of want to talk about in this video. I will start with an analogy because, of course, I love an analogy. If you're at home one evening after you've been to the pub and had a couple of pints and you thought, I'm going to put the chip pan on and cook myself some chips. Now, this is, of course, a reference circa 1973, with the last time someone actually, I think, used a chip pan, but just bear with me. Okay, so you're cooking your chips and your kitchen curtains catch fire. Now, that kitchen curtain fire will quickly spread throughout the kitchen and eventually, ultimately, through your house, which will destroy your home and everything that you own, basically. Would you wait until your house is a big pile of steaming rubble before you call the fire brigade? No, you wouldn't, because if you can get the fire brigade out, you can put the fire out. Yes, there'll be damage. Of course, there'll be damage. Your oven's going to be ruined. Your kitchen's probably going to be pretty fucked, to be honest. But, you can get insurance, you can rebuild, you can redecorate, and it's going to be work. And it's going to be inconvenient. And it's going to require some resolve to get back to where you started from. But if you just sit there and think, well, actually, you know what? I'm just going to wait till the whole thing burns to the ground. You have a much, much more daunting task. You have much more work to do, much, much more rebuilding to do before you can even consider improving your life from the point at which you started. So, whilst that analogy, like most of mine, was particularly rubbish, you can kind of understand my point. If you know that something's wrong, if you want something to stop being wrong, i.e. you want that fire to go away, then you address it as soon as is possible. You don't wait until the point where things simply can't get any worse and everything you own has been stripped away from you before you think, well, actually, now is the time. Now is the time to do something because you have this great vision of rebuilding twice as good, build back better or whatever, right? Second problem. We have in our minds, and I've spoken about this before when I've talked about addict stereotypes, we have in our minds this sort of vision as to what we believe rock bottom to be. If we go on a slightly sort of curveball, when we talk about alcohol addiction, alcoholism, we have this vision in our minds of what we believe alcoholics are going to eventually look like, what an alcoholic rock bottom will look like. You know, homeless, no wife, on a park bench drinking cheap wine out of a brown paper bag. Yes, it's again very cliched, but we have ingrained in us, probably again through the same media channels, this vision in our heads as to what rock bottom will look like. And obviously for gambling, that would be someone who's lost their house, their car, all their possessions, all their money, they're in debt, their wife's walked out, lost custody of their kids, their family won't talk to them, their mates will buggered off. We have in our minds this vision of what rock bottom might be. Now, speaking as someone who had a long-term gambling addiction and gambled, virtually every day of my life and caused myself substantial hardship throughout the course of my gambling career, I never reached what I would have believed or considered prior to my gambling addiction to have been rock bottom. I'm quite fortunate, I guess, in the fact that my wife stuck with me. I'm quite fortunate in the fact that I got to speak to my boss and he was very understanding about my addiction and allowed me to keep my job and keep working at the company I was at. So I never reached that rock bottom, and maybe I never would have done. So had I chosen this path of the great rebuild, where I waited to get to the worst possible point before taking action, before working to improve my lot, then I would have been waiting far, far longer, if not forever, before I took any action at all, and things would have got worse, which leads me on to the next point, of course. And it's again another cliche, but someone much wiser than me told me once, don't wait for rock bottom, because before you know it, you'll discover that rock bottom has a basement. And not maybe necessarily from personal experience, although I will come up with some anecdotes just in a moment, but from what I've heard from other people, there has been an idea that, well, what else can go wrong? This has happened to me, this has happened to me, this has happened to me, I'm skint, I'm in debt, blah, 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 right? All the things we associate with addiction. They believe that they're a rock bottom, but then they discover that actually there is a lower layer below that, and that's the sort of layer you don't want to be discovering. On a somewhat more serious note, and it's something I hate talking about, but if we think about the real true rock bottom, the worst case scenario outcome for any addiction, it's always going to be the same. Alcohol addiction, drug addiction, any kind of chemical or substance abuse will, taken to the nth degree and allowed to go on for long enough, shorten your life significantly. It will lead to death. That is, unfortunately, the fallout of a long-term addiction. And where's the line between what you consider to be rock bottom and that position from which there is no romantic, cinematographic, comeback, bounce back? There is no point of that. Now, whilst there is no sort of health implications, apart from maybe our mental health and some of the sort of destructive behaviours we have when we're in the grip of a gambling addiction, in order to either relieve the pain of our situation or to somehow self-sabotage, self-harm after a particularly bad losing session or whatever, there are no direct health impacts of the act of gambling. However, it would be remiss not to acknowledge that the ultimate rock bottom for gambling, as it has sadly been for so many people, and we see stories in the papers every day, is suicide. It's taking of one's own life. And that obviously is a point from which we cannot build back, we cannot recover. If you are in the midst of a gambling addiction, if you have spotted that your kitchen curtains are on fire, so to speak, if you notice that the world around you is starting to fall apart, then don't wait until it's collapsed and that you're buried in the rubble before you do something to rebuild, to address, accept the damage around you, however significant that might be at the moment. My experience from both my own position and from what I've heard from you guys and what I've read is that it can almost invariably get worse. Rock bottom is somewhat of a fabrication in our minds. It's a mental stereotypical position that we've built up that we believe to be the lowest a person can get. Whether or not we are able to recognise that in ourselves, and whether or not we are able to recognise that at the correct point to take appropriate action, I don't believe is easy to tell. So whatever position you're in, if you have made a decision that you want to stop gambling, not need, but want to stop gambling, then take action now. Don't wait for that last punt. Don't wait for that last blowout. Don't wait for you to do one more paycheck before you take action. If you don't want to take action, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to share with you my experiences. But I have been in positions where I've thought, right, that's it. It can't be any worse. I've just lost the last of my cash. I've just, had another argument with the missus and she's threatening to walk out. This, can't get any worse. And then you realise you can borrow some cash and lose that as well, and your missus will actually walk out. And then you can think, well, at least this hasn't happened. At least I've still got a job. Then you lose your job, and you realise that the level to which you can sink becomes lower and lower and lower. So if you wait for the lowest possible level, you may never reach it. You may reach it, and that may be a point from which you cannot recover. So whatever position you're in, if you want to do something now. Be it a small thing, like putting blocks in place on your bank cards, self-excluding from online casinos, talking to someone, opening up, discussing this with someone close to you who cares about you, who can look out for your well-being. Do it now, and don't wait for your kitchen curtains to become your whole house. Sorry, that was a bit of a heavy one, but I think it's I think it's something that I sort of fell foul of, not to the nth degree, but certainly I was waiting for things to be a lot worse before I addressed them when I already knew there was a problem. Stay safe and stay sane, everyone. Have a good